Hello everyone, welcome once again to another tutorial session in Python for bioinformatics. In today's video, I am going to show you how you can generate DNA sequences using Python. In order to generate a DNA sequence, you need to have the following information at hand. You need to define the length of sequence. When I say length of sequence, I mean how many bases or how many nucleotides do you want in your sequence. You need to have that. You also need to have the list of nucleotides from which the sequences will be generated. Let me show you how. So first of all, you want to define the length of the sequence. So let's say, for example, we want a sequence with 10 bases. So we say length equals 10. Then you also need to have what? Supply the list of nucleotides or bases. We need that. So consider this as what? Your template. So we say bases equals A, C, G, T. For this tutorial, we are using all the 4 bases, but you can also choose 3. If let's say you want your sequence to be comprised of just these 3 bases, then you need to make sure when you are creating the list here, you specify only this. By this tutorial, let's take it simple and use all the 4 bases. So we have it there. Let's check them out to make sure that we have defined them. So let's print them. So we have 10. We also have our bases defined for us. So let's begin the sequence generation. So we start by generating a sequence. So to help us generate the sequence, we need to import the random model. So we import a method in that model, and that is choice. So we say from random import choice. That is what we need first. So let's import that. Once we are done with this, we can continue. I am going to show you 3 approaches you can use to generate a sequence. So let's begin with the first one. So the first approach, we are going to use for loops. I have a video on loops, so you can watch that to also get an understanding of what for loops are. Link is in the description box. So we begin by first creating an empty sequence. So we say sequence equals empty string. You can use 2 single quotes or 2 double quotes. We just want an empty string. So we've created that. After that, we randomly select a base and add it to the sequence. We do this 10 times. So that's how we do it. We use the for loop. And we have already defined the length. So that is what we used what to do a repetition. So 10 times is the same as what? The length, because we want 10 bases. So we say for I in range length, base equals choice bases. So we randomly select the base and we add it here. We use that to elongate the sequence. So we say sequence plus equals base. So we have it there. So this means that the range here will give some values. Okay, the values will depend on the length you have here. So here we have 10. So that means that this process is going to be repeated 10 times. So that is why we are using this range function here. So the range here helps us to do that. So we run it. So now we have the sequence created. So let's print it. So notice how nicely it has been done for us. Please note that whenever you repeat this set of codes, you are likely to generate different sequences because the bases that we generated are done randomly. And so you can't have, or you might not have all the sequences being the same. Let me put it that way. So let's repeat this and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I repeat here and then I repeat here. So notice the sequences have changed because we are doing a random selection. So this is for the first approach. Let's look at the second approach. In the second approach, we use a list comprehension. List comprehensions compress the for loop we made, the classical for loop we use, into a single line. So let me show you how. So we say sequence equals, and we give our square brackets, and we say choice basis for I in range length. So notice how simple this is. It has compressed everything here into a single line. So now we run it. So let's print the sequence. So now we have the sequence here. Now list comprehensions are relatively faster than the classical for loop. So if you are dealing with a lot of sequences, or if you have multiple data sets, then it's advisable you use list comprehension to process them. But take a look at this sequence here. This is in the list format, but it's going to make much sense when we convert it to string. So let's convert the list to a string. So we say sequence equals empty string dot join sequence. This will work if all the elements in the list are string. Since we have all our elements as string, this works. Of course, you can assign this operation to another variable, but for now, let's use this one here. So let's run it. Now it's done. So let's print the sequence. We have it there as well. So for 10 times, or for the number of lengths we have here, random selection will be done for the basis. One nucleotide will be picked, and this will be used to what? Populate the sequence here. So that is also done. So this is how we use the other approach to generate a sequence. Now let's move on to the third approach. In the third approach, we are going to use while loops. While loops work under certain conditions. This means that a while loop will operate so far as a particular condition has been met. But let me also say this, that you should only use while loop if you have no other choice. It should be your last resort, because while loops can be problematic if you don't set the correct or the right conditions. Let me show you how we use the loop to generate the sequence. So first of all, create an empty list. So we say sequence equals empty list. This is similar to the first approach. So here we say while len sequence is not equals to 10, base equals choice basis sequence plus equals base. So here what is happening is that we are always going to check the length. So if the length is not equal to 10, then Python should randomly select a base and then use that to elongate the sequence here until the length becomes 10. That is what we are doing. Please also note that with while loops, if you don't set the correct condition, we can have the situation that we call endless loop, whereby the loop continues indefinitely. If you have such a situation, you just need to press the Ctrl and then the C button. Then it's going to exit the loop. So please take note of that. So please try and follow this the exact same way I am doing here. So we run it. So this will continue until the length here becomes 10. And that is the condition we are setting here. So we check the length and then compare and make sure that it's up to 10. After it's gone to the 10, then this loop will terminate, or we are going to exit this loop. So let's run it. Now the sequence has been generated, so let's print it. Nice. That has also been done for us. So this is how we use the while loop to also generate a sequence. So far, what we've done is to generate single sequences. So let's look at how we can generate multiple sequences. To do that, we are going to use functions and loops. So first, let's import the random model. So we say from random import choice. Then we create a function to generate a sequence. So we say def generate sequence, and we specify a default length. This means that when we call this function and we don't supply it with a length, it will use a length of 10 to generate the sequence. We supply it with the basis, and then I'll use the list comprehension to generate the sequence. So I'll say sequence equals choice basis for I in range length. So we have it there. Then we convert the sequence to a string. Then we return the sequence. By default, variables in a function exist only within that function. So we need to push it out. So that is why we are using the return statement here, so that it allows us to assign the whole operation to another variable so that we can access the sequence that is generated. So we run this. Now, when generating multiple sequences, you can have two scenarios. One scenario is that you will generate sequences of the same length, and the other scenario is that you will generate sequences with different lengths. So let's look at the first scenario where we want to generate sequences of the same length. Then we define or we determine the number of sequences we want to be generated. Let's say 5. Then we use less comprehension again. This time we have a function that will generate the sequence. So we don't need to rewrite all this code here. We just call the name here to do it. But because we have this number of sequences here, we have to do some form of iteration. So we say sequences equals generate sequence. Let's say we want a length of 5. So we specify it here. Then we say for I in range number of sequences. So we are saying that 5 times this function here should be called. And whenever we are calling this function, it also means that we are generating a sequence. So 5 times we are going to generate a sequence. So we run it. So now the sequences have been generated. Let's print here. So notice how it has been done nicely for us. We specified what? A length of 5. So we have sequences of length 5. So this is how we do it when we are generating sequences of the same length. Let's look at scenario 2. In scenario 2, we generate sequences with different lengths. Here we can have two situations. One situation is where the user defines his or her own length. So we say the user defined length. So let's apply some lengths here. We say length equals 10, 5, 6, 5. This means that we are going to generate a total of 4 sequences. These 4 sequences will take these lengths. So sequence 1 will take 10, sequence 2, 5, sequence 3, 6, sequence 4, 5. So let me show you how we generate it. We use list comprehensions. So we say sequences equals, we give our square brackets, and then we say generate sequence. We supply the length, and we say for length in length. So what we are doing is that we are iterating over this list here, and then for each value here, we call the function that generates the sequence, and then we supply it with a length, which will be that current value. So let's run it and you see what I'm talking about. So now we have run the code. So let's call the sequences, or let's print it. So we have it. So notice what? The different lengths. Let's check the length for, let's say, sequence 1. We say length sequences 0. So it's 10. So if you try this for the other ones, you will get their respective lengths. So this is for what? Situation 1, where we have user defined lengths. In the second situation, the lengths will be generated by the computer. So here, the numbers are randomly generated by Python. So let's see how that is done. We need to first import the random model. Here, we are going to use two methods in that model. Let's import them. From random, import choice. And then from random, import round int. The choice method will be used to select the basis. Round int will be used to generate the length. So let's import them. After that, we need to define the number of sequences. So let's define them here. So we say number of sequences equals, let's use 5. After that, we generate the length using round int. Please note that when using round int, you need to also specify the range so that Python will select the numbers in a particular range. So let me show you how that is done. So we generate the length using list comprehension. So we say round int, and then we specify the range here. So let's say we want length between 5 and 10. So we are going to put that here. So we say 5 and 10. Then we say for I in range, number of sequences. Because we have number of sequences here, which is 5, that means the length here will be 5. Python will randomly generate values, and the number of values will be 5 because we are dealing with 5 sequences here. So let's run it and you see what I'm talking about. So let's call the lengths. So we have them there. We had 5 sequences. So that is why we have what? 5 lengths generated. So from here, we use the same code as what we had here with the user-defined lengths. Now the difference between the user-defined lengths and this one here, that is the computer-generated length, is that here the computer will do the generation of the length. Here we define our lengths, but the code for generating the sequences are the same. So let's generate the sequence here. So we say generate sequence length for length in length. So here we are iterating over this length, and then we call the function supply the length, and the sequence will be generated. So let's run it. So now sequences have been generated. When we print it, you'll see them there. So the sequences have been generated, and if we check the length, you see that they correspond to what we have here. So that is for what? Computer generated length. So here you've been able to learn how to generate DNA sequences using a number of approaches, and I believe you are going to use that to help you in your future work. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next session. Goodbye.